Hello and welcome to Kalkine's Healthcare Innovations for a Sustainable Future webinar. This is part of our popular Invest Nest series. My name is James Preston. I'm a news anchor for Kalkine TV and I'll be your host for today's event. On behalf of Kalkine, it's a great pleasure to have both our esteemed speakers and our special guests joining us today. And the whole idea of the Invest Nest webinar is to present our audience with a panel of experts who share the potential of their business, the growth strategies, along with the company's value and vision. And we also aim to uncover the unheard stories behind these businesses to give you an idea on how the success that they now have has been built. So by the end of this webinar, hopefully you'll have gained some valuable business insights and a guidance on emerging themes and breakthrough trends in the Australian market. Now, each of our experts will speak for around 15 minutes. The business presentation will be for 15 minutes. You'll see our esteemed speakers share their screen and run through a series of facts and figures and what they've been working on. And then we'll also have a 5-minute Q&A session. Now, in terms of how that one works, if you have a little look at your screen, right down the bottom of Zoom on the bottom right, you'll see Q&A. That's where you want to type in your questions. I'll then curate a few of those and I'll pass them across to each of our speakers as we run through the presentation itself. So hopefully we're all across that. And any questions we don't get to in the desired time allotment of the 5 minutes per speaker, you can still get them answered. We'll just do that a little later. Keep this address handy for doing so. It's info@kalkinemedia.com. Alrighty, that's our admin. So let's get stuck into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another entry in our popular Invest Nest webinar series titled Healthcare Innovations for a Sustainable Future. If you're just joining us, my name is James Preston. I'll be your moderator for this session. And just before we start, just let me inform everyone that this webinar is for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation to buy, sell, or hold the stock of the company or any companies mentioned, or to engage in any investment activity under discussion for today. We are neither licensed nor qualified to provide investment advice through this platform. Now, ensuring healthy lives and promoting physical and mental well-being is essential as we are facing a global health crisis, which has been going on now for the best part of 2 years. Global health has increasingly gained international visibility and prominence throughout the pandemic. From big data to precision medicine, the recent advances in biomedical research have swept away the conventional approach to medical science. And to discuss healthcare innovations, today we have with us 3 of our valued clients who are leaders in the Australian healthcare and biotech space. That includes Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Cynata Therapeutics, Dr. Ross Macdonald, Executive Chair and CEO of Invion Limited, Mr. Thian Chew, and CEO and Managing Director of PainChek Limited, Mr. Philip Daffas. Well, let's kick things off with our first guest speaker, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Cynata Therapeutics. That's Dr. Ross Macdonald. Now, Dr. Macdonald holds a strong track record of success in pharmaceutical and biotechnology businesses and has over 20 years of experience. Dr. Macdonald has completed a PhD in biochemistry from Monash University and a graduate diploma in business administration from Swinburne University. He's also a member of the Licensing Executive Society. As for Cynata Therapeutics, it's an ASX listed company with a trading code of CYP. Of course, it is Australian based and it focuses on clinical stage stem cell and regenerative medicine and is based out of Victoria. The company also has a key focus on the development of therapies based on its unique chimeras technology, which Dr. Macdonald can speak a lot more about, most certainly having far more expertise than I do on the topic. So without further ado, Dr. Macdonald, welcome to Kalkine. The virtual floor is yours. If you could please share your screen when you're ready and have a little welcome to our guests.
Thanks very much, James, for the introduction and welcome everybody to our presentation today. As James indicated, we are an ASX listed biotech company at clinical stage, developing a unique and proprietary stem cell technology, which we call Chimeras. The company is now at advanced stage in developing its manufacturing process, and it is ultimately the manufacture of cell-based medicines, which is the key to their commercial and clinical success. We have a strong background in safety and efficacy, utilising our stem cell technologies, having completed a clinical trial in graft versus host disease, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and have multiple clinical trials underway or on the slate for commencement within the next short period. The various targets that we're pursuing represent very large and attractive commercial markets. For the most part, the utilisation of cells as medicine is designed to address diseases that currently are very poorly treated, or otherwise, as it's called, undruggable. And whilst modern medicine has created cures for many of the challenges that we face therapeutically, there still remain many, many diseases which are very poorly treated or not treated at all well. And ultimately, success in any of those target areas will provide substantial share price uplift for our investors. First of all, let me give you a brief primer on MSCs and why MSCs represent an exciting therapeutic paradigm. And overarching all of this is the philosophy of utilising cells as medicine, using the body's own mechanisms of defence and repair to ultimately address disease and injury. And MSCs, or mesenchymal stem cells, which form the basis of Cynata's proprietary technology, are the coordinator of our immune system, often described as the sensor and switcher of the immune system, which in other words means switching perhaps from a surveillance approach to an attack approach. And whilst this slide is very complex, and I won't go into all of the detail, it serves to illustrate that MSCs play a very central role in coordinating many of the functions of our immune system, which are responsible for defense against invading organisms, for example, viruses or bacteria, for repairing tissue after damage, for instance, after a fracture, or for example, a stroke or a myocardial infarction, that is a heart attack, and many, many other areas as well of therapeutic interest. So much is the interest in MSCs that there are more than 1,000 clinical trials having been commenced around the world using MSCs in the past decade or so. And Cynata is very much at the forefront of this technology with our proprietary Cymerus technology. Where Cynata's technology has a major competitive advantage is in the manufacture of these exciting and promising cell-based therapies. And if we contrast our procedure, patented process, which we call Cymerus, with the conventional or traditional approach, you'll see that there's a dramatic difference between what we do as a cutting-edge leader in this field compared with the conventional approach. And in the top panel here, the usual approach to manufacturing these cell-based medicines is to start with a tissue sample from a donor, a living donor. Because we're dealing with a living drug, we need living donors. That's typically a bone marrow aspirate or adipose tissue, that's fat tissue, from which the cells are then isolated and then grown in culture. They're expanded, the cells divide. So 2 cells to 4 to 8 to 16 and so on. And that results in the finished product. But that process is flawed in many ways, not the least of which is a requirement for multiple donors. And this is a very different process to donating blood, for instance, which is relatively painless and risk-free, compared with donating bone marrow, which is a surgical procedure. Cynata's patented process, on the other hand, relies on a Nobel Prize-winning technology, which allows us to derive a starting material from one single donation from one single donor. So we never need to go back to donors ever again, having established a large quantity of our starting material that we can then differentiate or turn into the finished mesenchymal stem cell product, or MSC. Ultimately, this ensures a high level of consistency, large quantities of product of high quality, leading in the end to a very efficient clinical outcome in the disease targets that we are pursuing. As I indicate in this slide, there's multiple advantages here. First of all, we our technology is covered by a range of patents which are held not only by Cynata but also by our licensor, the Wisconsin University, or WARF as it's called, Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, and ultimately utilising a single blood donation from a single donor is a major competitive advantage. This has also been underscored by commentary from the leading regulatory agency in the world, the United States Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. The FDA has recently assessed another MSC-based therapeutic product, and unfortunately for that applicant, that application for marketing authorization was rejected. But the commentary from the FDA at that time provided not only a very clear indication of exactly how the regulatory agency thinks about these products, and provides, of course, Cynata an extensive background to further data generation to satisfy the FDA, but also has underscored the exact shortcoming that Cynata's technology seeks to address. And that is, as the FDA put it, substantial functional heterogeneity between MSC batches. They're simply saying that if the manufacturer relies on deriving their product from different donors, then every time they do that, then on the face of it, they have a different product. And of course, that's unacceptable in drug product development, where we have to ensure absolute consistency no matter how, where or when the product is manufactured. That has led us now to a very rich and robust clinical development pipeline. We have a phase 3 clinical trial underway in osteoarthritis, which is funded substantially by the Australian government through NHMRC. We have a phase 1/2 clinical trial that's underway in respiratory distress at the moment, primarily targeting COVID-19 patients. We expect to commence a clinical trial in graft versus host disease in the next 12 months or so, and also commence a clinical trial in diabetic foot ulcers later this year. So a very robust pipeline of late-stage assets. Some of you may be aware of a recent announcement from Cynata in relation to a partnership that we have with Fujifilm, which goes back a long time, back to 2017. But initially, that deal with Fujifilm, one of the major regenerative medicine companies in the world, was focused on commercialization of our graft versus host disease product. But ultimately, with some delays that were incurred primarily because of the pandemic, we negotiated with Fujifilm recently to return those rights back to Cynata, allowing us now to accelerate development for that very exciting indication. In addition to that, and as part of that transaction, Fujifilm paid Cynata $5 million, which we just received this week. We now retain all development and commercialization rights to our lead product in graft versus host disease. And in exchange, Fujifilm will have a first right to manufacture our product and will retain their shares in Cynata. They're a major shareholder of ours, owning just under 6%. So an escrow over their shares is a tremendous sign of their enthusiasm for the future of the company, and I think a very solid indication to our existing shareholders that Fujifilm was there for the long haul. Very briefly, I'll make some mention of our graft versus host disease trial, which was completed a year and a half or so ago with the 2-year follow-up of those patients. This is a devastating condition that occurs in patients who have had a bone marrow transplant, usually as part of their treatment for cancer. In a significant proportion of patients, there is really no treatment for this condition, and the outlook is very, very poor, with a survival rate out to about 2 years of less than 20%. We treated our patients with our stem cell product, and by day 100, we saw over half of the patients having a complete response. That's a complete resolution of symptoms and a survival rate of nearly all of the patients. Out to 2 years, we saw 60% survival, which compares extremely well with either the standard of care, that is the existing treatment options for these patients, or other MSC products, which were not quite as successful. The outcome of this study was considered so exciting that Nature Medicine, the most prestigious medical journal in the world, featured our article on the front cover of that magazine late last year. So a great achievement for Cynata and our shareholders. Looking ahead at our plans for graft versus host disease, now that we've got the rights back from Fujifilm, we have orphan drug designation already for the product, which provides significant incentives in the United States. Our phase 1 clinical trial provides a very robust basis for moving forward in the US. So now we're designing a clinical trial, which is the design process in engaging with clinicians and study sites is now underway. That will then lead to us engaging with the FDA to move forward with a clinical trial in the US, probably in the first half of next year. Briefly now, some of our other clinical activities. I mentioned before, we have a phase 3 clinical trial in osteoarthritis, a major commercial target with a commercial value of in excess of $11 billion US. There is no complete cure for this condition. It's progressive degenerative disease, and many people will know the suffering that is incurred in osteoarthritis. Starts off very mild, but ultimately gets worse and worse until the patient has difficulty with their day-to-day activities and life, ultimately leading to a joint replacement. If our MSCs can ultimately be shown to change the outcome of this condition, it will be a major breakthrough in the treatment of this very challenging disease. It's in 440 patients, so a very well-designed, well-controlled clinical study that is a landmark in the MSC space. We have a clinical trial underway in respiratory distress, which we call the MEND trial. Respiratory distress or respiratory failure has been front page of the newspapers for the last year and a half because it is the complication that most patients with COVID-19 end up with if they get severely ill. It's a very challenging condition for which there is no specific treatment. Patients are just managed. So there's a significant market opportunity here that goes well beyond COVID-19 patients and extends into patients, for instance, who have respiratory distress from a range of other conditions such as influenza, for example. That study is now underway, and on current estimates, we expect to complete patient recruitment later this year. Finally, we have a phase 1/2 clinical trial expected to get underway again later this year in diabetic foot ulcers. Again, another major unmet medical need with a global market in excess of $10 billion. These are patients typically who have diabetes and in whom injury, perhaps to their lower leg, their foot, ultimately results in a chronic wound, which is very, very difficult to treat and in which treatment really hasn't changed in the last 100 years. Finally, to look at some of our preclinical data, this is, I guess, a very rich pipeline of activity that we can commence at any stage, dependent upon partnering, in areas such as coronary artery disease, heart attack, and others. We've currently put on hold our renal transplantation and IPF programs, since we're now focusing on the other 4 clinical trial activities that will be getting underway shortly. The market opportunities I've already spoken about, but happy to go into detail on that in the Q&A. Finally, looking ahead at our near-term catalysts, first of all, completing the startup activities in the diabetic foot ulcer trial and getting that underway would be a key driver of value for shareholders. Completing recruitment in our respiratory distress MEND trial, advancing our US regulatory strategy and getting a trial underway in graft versus host disease, another major driver of value. Finalising ultimately our clinical trial plans for IPF and renal transplantation. Completing recruitment in the phase 3 osteoarthritis trial, and then further out in 2024 as we expect to report results on that trial. And then in parallel, our commercial business-to-business activities, which are a very important part of our business strategy, is pursuing commercial discussions and executing further corporate partnerships beyond the arrangement that we now have with Fujifilm. So I'd like to thank you very much, draw your attention to our safe harbor statement here, please do visit our website at www.cynata.com or the ASX site for further information and our announcements. I look forward to answering any of your questions and to completing the presentation today. Thank you.
Ross, thank you so much for your time just then. It was a very insightful presentation. I wanted to raise a point there because you're talking a little bit there about acute respiratory issues and working through a phase 2 trial for that. Just recently, the Australian government, back on September 29, they released the data on deaths and births for 2020, which had COVID-19 as the 38th leading cause of death, and the 5 leading causes also having decreased with a significant reduction in respiratory diseases. How does that factor into what you're doing with Cynata and your phase 2 trials in that respect?
Well, as I mentioned, respiratory distress is a major issue long before COVID became front page news. Respiratory distress arises in patients, for example, who have influenza. And yes, last year, the death rate from flu was way down on what it would be in a normal year. And that's primarily because we're all locked up. And of course, isolation and quarantine is a fantastic way of preventing respiratory viruses from transmission throughout the community, as has been evidenced. But for instance, the most recent data from the UK, which of course is just moving into its flu season, has them on high alert because everybody has been locked up for the past 12 months. There's no immunity. The vaccines haven't been able to incorporate the new strains of flu virus. And so flu may well be a major problem for the next 12 to 24 months. But transcending that, respiratory distress is also associated with a condition called cytokine storm or cytokine release syndrome, which also is a very significant unmet medical need. In fact, around 10 to 20% of patients in an ICU in a normal year would be there because they've got cytokine release syndrome or respiratory distress. And MSCs are particularly useful also in that broad spectrum of pathology that is associated with these conditions. So we're very excited about it. I mean, obviously COVID, I hate to say this, but COVID gave us an opportunity to move quickly into the clinic in respiratory distress, but it was always something that was a great opportunity for us long before the pandemic reared its ugly head last year.
Thank you for that response. It's very interesting to just see how the future will look. Of course, no one really knows exactly what's going to pan out from here, I suppose. And, you've mentioned lockdowns playing a vital role, vaccines also having a role to play. So your space will become, I think, one of real intrigue. Let's move on to some of the questions from some of our attendees today. We'll start with Ray, who says, what do you believe provides the competitive edge to Cynata over other stem cell and regenerative medicine companies in the healthcare space?
Well, Ray, I'll limit my answer specifically to MSCs or mesenchymal stem cells, which is the core cell technology that we're developing. And it's quite simply the difference between picks and shovels and D9 doses. Cynata's technology provides a commercializable, or if you like it, industrializable process for manufacturing these very complex drugs, cell therapies, and a reliance on donors who are prepared to donate their fat tissue or their bone marrow tissue and the attendant problems associated with that, let alone the biological issues associated with expanding the cells that are derived in such a way, really is not a solution to commercial scale manufacture. So we've simply taken what is a very exciting and promising medical paradigm and applied a commercializable or industrializable manufacturing solution. And there's many, many examples across many industries of exactly that approach occurring, whether it's the manufacture of insulin, which for decades relied upon lots and lots of pig pancreases and a very messy process. Once a breakthrough occurred in being able to clone the gene for insulin, then of course the pigs were no longer required. And it's a similar situation here. We've just taken the very exciting MSC modality, and we've said there's a better way of making these products so that ultimately they can be applied to commercial markets for patients around the world.
Absolutely. Let's go to Sandra Jenner now, who says, Cynata has been winning recognition for its proprietary Cymerus and MSC technology worldwide. What are the company's near-term and long-term plans to advance this platform?
The clinical development activities that we have underway are exactly with that in mind, to take our products forward, ultimately to registration. But in parallel with that, we have a vigorous partner engagement program, recognising that we're a small company with limited resources and a broad platform with multiple shots on goal that we just don't have the capacity to develop all ourselves. So partnering those programs will be very important as well.
Wonderful. We'll just go one final one here, Ross, from Sam Wilson, who says, Cynata has embarked on multiple clinical trials for disease targets like osteoarthritis and respiratory distress. Could you shed some light on the company's clinical trial plans beyond 2021, looking forward to the future?
Yeah, so in addition to the two that you mentioned, our recently reacquired rights to graft versus host disease have created a very exciting new opportunity for us with a leading product in this space. Although graft versus host disease is a relatively and thankfully rare disease, that does represent a major unmet medical need, which, as I said, a fatality rate in patients who fail to respond to standard of care of in excess of 80%. So GVHD, an important pathway. The diabetic foot ulcer trial, a very important pathway. The other preclinical findings that we have reported on, for example, in cardiovascular disease, we'll likely pursue with partners.
Wonderful. And just one final one here, because it's come through from Patrick. He says, hi, Ross. Are you able to give an update on numbers enrolled in OA and MEP?
No.
Sure.
Well, typically we don't announce, patient by patient recruitment into clinical trials, that especially where recruitment rates can be fluctuate very highly, as we're seeing, of course, with the pandemic. I mean, 12 months ago, there was an outbreak across Australia, then basically 6 months of no COVID patients and no influenza either, because it was the summer season. And now suddenly, of course, in both in Sydney and Melbourne, we've seen a dramatic increase in patient numbers, slowly starting to come off in Sydney. But it's very, look, we understand shareholders want to know incrementally exactly how far we are along that pathway, but it does create all sorts of expectations that may or may not be appropriate.
Wonderful. Well, Ross, thank you so much for sharing everything today, answering those questions. It's been absolutely brilliant to get your insights.
Thanks, James.
Now, I also get to just hang around to the end as well, because we would like to hear some final thoughts from Cynata. But let's now continue moving on. And of course, if you didn't have your question answered there, the way to do it is to send us an email at info@kalkinemedia.com, and we'll make sure that that does get addressed in the coming days. Let's keep moving forward for now, though. It's time to welcome our second guest for this morning, or should I now say afternoon? We are well and truly into afternoon. That is, of course, the Executive Chair and CEO of Invion. That is Mr. Thian Chew. Now, Thian has more than 25 years of experience in investing, finance, and transforming business operations. He was previously an executive director at Goldman Sachs, managing its proprietary investments, including growth capital, private equity, and special situations. Thian Chew is also an adjunct professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and Schools of Business and Life Sciences. He's also a qualified chartered accountant, and in other words, there's more qualifications and platitudes than you can possibly throw a stick at. As for Invion Limited, it's an Australian life sciences company dedicated to transforming photodynamic therapy, or PDT, to develop innovative and effective cancer treatments. The firm is leading the global clinical development of Photosoft TM technology, which is an improved next-generation photodynamic therapy. Now, to talk more about this development and the company more broadly, I now turn the screen over to Mr. Chew. Thian, thank you so much for being here today with Kalkine.
Many thanks, James, and very nice to meet you, and great to have the opportunity to share our story with everyone. If you don't mind, I'll just...
Very incredibly excited to have you here, mate. So whenever you're ready, I'll let you take away with that screen. Beautiful. All right, Thian, all yours.
All right, fantastic. So I guess I should start off by talking a little bit about the company itself. Photodynamic therapy is essentially a technology where you apply a compound either on your skin or into your body. And the compound, which is called a photosensitizer, actually selectively gets absorbed and accumulated in cancer cells or abnormal cells. By itself, nothing happens. But when you actually shine a certain frequency of light, it triggers an oxidation process. I'll go through that in a little bit, which just kills those targeted cells and leaves the healthy cells untouched. So we actually have a new generation or next generation version of this Photosoft technology that we acquired the license for from RMW Cho Group that's been developing it for the last 15, 20 years. And we're looking at it primarily in the area of cancers, which we're expanding in a couple of areas on top of that. We actually had a little bit of experience with this little virus that was going around. So we were actually planning to go into clinical trials last year, and we had to put some of those activities on hold. And we actually took the opportunity to take a step back and go back and really try to optimize and improve the underlying what we call active pharmaceutical ingredient, or API. And that actually seems to have given us some really interesting results, which I'll go through a little bit later. The other thing is we work together with some great partners. We've been working with the Hudson Institute of Medical Research based out near Monash. And they have about 400 or 500 researchers and have a very strong area in expertise in cancers. We have a lead scientist there is Dr. Andrew Stevens, who, if you go on our website, you can see him talk a little bit about some of the work he did. We also work with the Peter MacCallum Cancer Center, which is one of the world's leading centers for cancer, that really uniquely combines the research with actually clinical trials. And so that accelerates that bridge between the two. And they're a fantastic partner we've been working with for a number of years as well. The other aspect of Invion is the clinical development for cancer is actually fully funded by RMW Cho Group. They're actually the inventor and owner of the technology. And what tends to happen is you see our cash flow go up and go down and go up and go down. That's because they're reimbursing us for our expenses and actually developing the cancer side of things. And in exchange, we have the exclusive commercial rights across all applications in Australia and New Zealand. Recently, we actually expanded our territories and rights to include applications of the technology in atherosclerosis, which is one of the big factors in heart disease, as well as infectious diseases in several Asia-Pacific countries. And as part of that, we would then start co-developing this technology in those disease areas, which really means that we'll be taking a much more active co-funding role as well. Now, talk a little bit about photodynamic therapy. The concept is not that new. It's been around, but it really didn't quite take off, and I'll explain why. But just to go back to what it does, I mentioned there's a photosensitizer, it's a compound with light activation, and what happens, it very selectively accumulates in tumor tissue, and when a certain frequency of light goes into it, singlet oxygen is produced. It's a type of reactive oxygen species, which is essentially cytotoxic to cells, particularly cancer cells that it's accumulated in, and it kills those cells. And yet it clears from healthy cells. So it's a very, very targeted therapy. And one of the challenges from previous versions of the technology were, for example, the early stage versions, which are FDA approved, were blood-based. And as a result, it stayed in the system for many, many weeks it wasn't very selective, and even when there wasn't any light, it tended to react with all sorts of things within the body. So what we've found is our photosensitizer is extremely selective. It actually, even though it's been approved, the side effects and shortcomings, at least at an in vivo level, were found to be quite well addressed. Without light, it clears from cells, and without light, no damage is done to healthy cells. The other aspect is the light activation wavelength is actually enables deeper penetration into the tissue, which means that we have more applications for this technology. And we've actually tested it on a number of different cancers. Before we get there, I might actually show a little video to give you a little sense on how it works.
While modern medicine has made great strides in treating cancer, most chemotherapy comes with debilitating side effects and the possibility that the tumour becomes resistant to treatment. Invion is seeking to change this situation with a novel and highly targeted photosensitizing agent, IVX-PDT, which has the potential to turn photodynamic therapy into a powerful approach that works with the body to eliminate cancer. IVX-PDT is formulated for topical and intravenous administration. Like other photosensitizing agents, IVX-PDT remains inert until activated by a specific wavelength of light. Upon activation, the compound generates reactive oxygen species which cause cancer cell death through necrosis. Necrosis and the accompanying cell lysis provokes an immune response, further enhancing the clearance of cancer cells and helping to prevent recurrences. However, unlike some photosensitizing agents, IVX-PDT preferentially accumulates in tumour cells and is rapidly cleared from healthy tissue, resulting in greatly reduced side effects from light sensitivity in off-target tissues. In addition, the specific wavelength of light needed to activate IVX-PDT can penetrate deep into tissues for highly effective cancer cell eradication. Learn more about the current status of IVX-PDT by contacting us at www.inviongroup.com.
Okay, so that's a little bit of background about PDT. It's less widely understood or recognized in the industry. However, so as I mentioned during the this past couple of years, we've had a chance to go back and actually look at improving our underlying API or the drug candidate. And what we did was we actually literally have over 100 different compounds that we've been testing on different aspects. And we finally chose what we call INV-043. And that's the compound that we're looking to take into the clinic. And before we did that, what we did was did some initial proof of concept work on some, basically on some mice. And what we found was the performance of this compound was substantially better than our previous compound that we were looking to take into the clinic. It was actually, 50 times more effective than our previous version, and over 600 times more effective than the clinically approved photosensitizing agent, teleporphin sodium. And what we also found was there was actually a very wide range between a dosage that we found didn't have any impact on the safety and toxicity readings for the mice, and the actual therapeutic dosage. In fact, there was like a 500-fold difference. So there's a lot of scope here to make this a very safe drug that has exceptional activity. And in fact, we tested it on a number of different cancer types. We tested on mice with T-cell lymphoma, triple-negative breast, and pancreatic cancers. And that's one of the changes. Many cancer therapies are very, very focused on one type of cancer indication. And we believe our technology can be widely used across multiple indications. And we definitely demonstrated that across a number of different cancers in vivo. What we are also looking at now is taking the next stage of testing, which we will announce whenever it's when the results are ready. But remember, this first round of testing was really just to test mice that did not have an immune system. It literally just looked at how much of the cancer tumor was actually regressed or destroyed. The next set of proof of concept testing is going to be focused on immune competent mice, which basically means that their immune system is still intact, and it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. So watch that space. As I mentioned before, there really wasn't any off-target toxicity, which means that it seems quite safe from a usage perspective. We're looking at potential applications both in dermal, on topical level, or intravenously as well. And I didn't have the photos here, but if you look on the announcements that we made in May, I didn't really want to have kind of disgusting animal mouse photos on a webinar, but you can actually see if you shine a certain frequency of light, the tumors themselves actually glow. They kind of like light up like a Christmas tree. And there was one photo that you can see, which was an ovarian cancer where it already metastasized. So they already spread, and you can actually see little spots where it has spread, which means that in addition to being a therapeutic application, what it might have applications toward is a diagnostic, so that it might work together, for example, with surgeons, where they can actually look at where the tumors are. And so there's a dual application potential for this technology, which is both a diagnostic as well as therapeutic. So we call it theragnostic. And so we're pretty excited about taking the next steps on that. In addition to cancer, we also closed last month a small round, $4.5 million round. And that actually gave us the ability to expand our territories beyond Australia and New Zealand, and in a couple of new disease areas. There's been a lot of precedent and research done on the use of PDT in both atherosclerosis as well as infectious diseases. So atherosclerosis is essentially where plaque builds up in arteries, etc., and it's really a major cause of fatal heart diseases around the world. And heart disease is actually the #1 killer. It kills 3 times as many people as cancers. And what the photosensitizer would look to do is to accumulate selectively in those plaques. And then when you shine a light, it basically gets rid of those and breaks up those plaques. And so that's kind of the objective on that one. And there's a similar concept in application to infectious diseases. And infectious diseases includes viral, bacterial, fungal, and parasitic. And we know of one particular one that's been a little bit topical recently. And so what we want to do here is, this is in an earlier stage of discovery versus a cancer. The cancers we're really looking as our next step is to get into the clinic. This will be an earlier stage discovery process, but it does open up the door for some longer term opportunities out there for our return. And our territories actually go beyond Australia, New Zealand into Asia Pacific, ex-Greater China. So that's what I had to share today. Thank you for the opportunity. Please keep track of what we're looking at in Invion, and we'll be hopefully making some interesting findings as we conclude them over the coming months. James, I'll pass back to you.
Thian, thank you. That's really, really interesting stuff. I mean, the last time I've seen such an in-depth sort of look at cancer treatments was probably I Am Legend in the movies about 20 years ago. So it's great to see the actual science behind what goes on there. Now, I won't ask a question myself because we've got a stack here to get through. It's been a presentation that's really resonated, it would seem. Let's start with one which I think is a really interesting one here from Ray. Do you believe that cancer can be completely eradicated?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, it's actually the even though heart disease is the largest cause of death, the largest funding is into cancers from a pharmaceutical development. That's a very difficult question to answer, especially in the work that we do. We very rarely talk about curing cancer. We talk about remission because you just never know. It's certainly a goal that many of us in the industry are looking to do, and we believe that our technology, in fact, we're very excited that our technology can actually make a difference in that space, but certainly not looking to promise the curing of cancer. I think that's a pretty challenging thing, but we believe we can make a difference.
Well, fingers crossed we can get a little bit closer regardless. Let's move on here to Ava, who says, how is Invion ensuring that it remains funded throughout its research and development initiatives?
That's a great question. In fact, I might answer that question in two buckets. In terms of the cancer bucket, our current agreement is RMW Cho Group is actually fully funding us for that side of things. So every time we spend money, they basically reimburse us for it. So that's pretty straightforward. The second aspect is with the atherosclerosis and infectious diseases. That's our new disease areas. In that area, we actually are co-funding the development there. And the deal we have with RMW is for preclinical work, they will fund 75% of the costs, and we will fund 25%. Now, when we get to the clinic and do clinical trials, obviously we get the large majority of the benefit. So we will be funding 75% of the clinical trials, and the Cho Group will fund 25%. So what that means from a capital raising perspective is that as we get more developed in that area, and as we need more capital to move towards the clinic and beyond, that will implicitly mean that we will need capital. Right now, we just did a small $4.5 million raise. We have a little bit of cash, but obviously as you get closer and closer to the clinic, the need for capital becomes quite dramatically higher.
Absolutely. Now, from an anonymous attendee, I'd love to give them a name, but they haven't provided it. They've said, what are you hoping to see in your next POC study on mice with immunity? And when do you think these results will be released?
Yeah, that's actually a very well educated sort of audience member. So our POC in the first set of tests that we did that we announced in May is focused on mice that had no immune system. So literally we put the photosensitizer in, we shone the light, it killed the cancer. The cancers basically got smaller. That's it. The next round of proof of concept is really going to be focused on what does the immune system do? How does it react? So we've been testing on actual mice that have an immune system intact, and we'll be observing what happens with a tumor. Does it get smaller? Does it, what happens to it? In terms of timing, we hope that timing won't be too far away because we've been doing those tests, and please keep a watch out for the results when they're ready.
We've got another one here from Joe Bluebird, who says, there are so many biotech companies in Australia doing research on cancer and developing medicines. How is Invion different from those other ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a couple of differences here. The first one is most cancer treatment technologies are very focused on a specific indication. And even if you go to the clinician, there's generally a bias. The clinician says, well, if it worked for another cancer, it's not going to work for the cancer I focus on. And we're kind of breaking the boundaries a little bit there, where we can actually, we've actually shown that we actually can regress multiple types of tumors. So that's one impact. The other difference is that we actually, our cost of treatment ideally will be probably a lower cost than many of the new therapies coming out. So things like immunotherapies can be shown to be extremely effective, but there's a very complicated process to actually treat patients, which means that it becomes quite expensive, for the patient and for society. And so what we hope to have is something that's a lot less complicated and still has the efficacy that we target, and that should hopefully be good for everyone.
Well answered, and thank you very much for answering all those questions. We've got to move on. We've still got quite a few there, but we'll have to make sure that we get those to you a little bit after the webinar itself. And of course, if you haven't had your question answered, you still got one that you want to put forward, simple thing to do, info@kalkinemedia.com, and then we'll pass that on to Thian. But Thian, thank you so much for sharing what Invion's getting up to.
Great, thanks, James.
All right, well, last but not least, we do now move to our final guest speaker for today. It's been a very interesting webinar so far. We've learnt plenty to date, but there's still plenty more to take in. Let's now catch up on what is happening with PainChek with CEO and Managing Director, Mr. Philip Daffas. Now, he's a highly accomplished global business leader and people manager. Mr. Daffas has more than 25 years of experience working with leading blue chip healthcare companies and innovative technology startup companies across Australia, as well as Europe and the US. In terms of PainChek itself, it engages in the development and commercialization of mobile medical device applications. And these device applications automate intelligent pain assessment of individuals who are unable to communicate their pain with carers, which is, of course, very important technology. And the journey of PainChek began back in 2016, and since then, they have come a long way, achieving several core goals. PainChek envisions to emerge as a leader in the market for innovative pain assessment products while providing services to help enhance the quality of life for people suffering from pain. And to take us through PainChek and all of those incredible applications, it's now my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Philip Daffas, who has been very patient so far today. Philip, welcome to Kalkine.
Thank you very much, James. And it's been a really good session. So I've really enjoyed the presentation. So thank you. Very good. Should I share my screen?
Go for it.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. So welcome everybody, and thank you for your time today. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. I will be focusing on PainChek on our results up to June this year. We're just about to finalise the September results in the next few days, so I'll focus most of my talk on the June results to date. As I was saying, we are a listed company. We're actually a medical device that comes in the form of an app, and we're here in the pain assessment area, listed in 2016, and made our first sale actually in end of 2017 here in Australia. In terms of the highlights, we are a software as a service business, and we use artificial intelligence to help us do the pain assessment technology. The product and technology is both clinically validated and regulatory cleared in up to 6 markets around the world, and we're working on the US right now. And then we do have multiple patents granted around the world as well. What's been really significant is that in just 4 years, we've actually really penetrated strongly the Australian market, focusing on aged care, where we've now more than 1,500 aged care facilities and close to over 125,000 beds signed up in Australia, which is around 60% of the local market share. And we've also got sales and growing sales in the UK, New Zealand and Singapore, and this year looking into getting to Canada as well, followed by the US. Because it's a SaaS business and we are pure software, there's no actual hardware products, we are very high gross margins, 85% gross margins. And of course, the whole focus for us is better outcomes for patients and better outcomes for our enterprise customers. So our mission and our purpose is very simple. It's to give a voice to people who cannot reliably verbalize their pain. And on one extreme, there's the elders, people living with dementia, for example, and cognitive impairments, who have lost their ability to reliably verbalize their pain. And sometimes it actually, being in an aged care facility or in home care, their behaviours sometimes get misunderstood when often it's underlying pain that's causing the behaviours, but it can be misunderstood for the dementia itself, and therefore potentially, and it's seen to have happened, to be mistreated. On the other extreme, of course, there's the very young kids, there's the pre-verbal children who haven't learned to speak yet and therefore can't communicate their pain levels. And that causes a lot of confusion and stress for the healthcare professionals and for mums and dads at home. So we're focused on both the top end, the elderly, and also very, very young pre-verbal children. These are large markets as well, global markets. More than 50 million people live with dementia, and that's grown to 75 million by 2025, or as projected. And people with dementia occupy actually more than a third of hospital beds at any one time, which is pretty significant. And in fact, what happens in this situation, people with dementia can shift between aged care, home care, and hospital care on a regular basis. So those are three key markets we have for the PainChek product in that sector. With the children, we know there's about 400 million pre-verbal children at any one time around the world, and about 140 million of those are within 1 month to 1 year of age. And as you'll see, we've got our first infant product ready now on the market. So if we look at the adult sector, this is where we started, and we started this with the dementia area. When we built our first product, it comes in the form of an app, as you can see on the right-hand side. And the good thing about this is that there were many pain scales available at the time. Pain scales, such as the Abbey pain scale, has been on the market for 20 years, but they are paper-based. They are very subjective, and frankly, they're very rarely used because of those factors. What we have done is we've maintained the sort of core clinical practice, but improved the process. What we have done, we've brought artificial intelligence to do the facial assessment of the pain. That's done with a 3-second video assessment. And then we've intelligently automated the other 5 domains of the pain assessment process, giving a reliable and accurate pain assessment score, giving, say, no pain, mild or moderate or severe pain, and that's all done at the point of care, right by the patient or the residents in aged care. So where do we start? We started in aged care, and we started in aged care because that's where the problem's at its greatest. More than 50% of people in aged care are living with dementia or cognitive impairment, and 80% or more are suffering with chronic pain. So we started here to validate the product, and this, as you can see, is a summary of how we've gone up until June 21. So now we've got more than 1,500 aged care facilities under contract, the majority in Australia, and more than 120,000 beds in those sectors, with about 50,000 plus now already implemented. This is a map of Australia to show you how present we are. We're not just in every state of Australia, we're not just in every city, we're effectively in every town of Australia that has aged care facilities. And that really has helped broaden our brand awareness locally and also internationally. This is our resulting ARR, our revenue projections. The value of those contracts are more than $5.5 million post what we call the government trial, because we were very fortunate that 2 years ago the federal government saw that we had this product in aged care, and they actually accelerated its use by providing us with a $5 million grant, which has helped us move to that 129,000 beds. Those clients will be coming off the government grant. They've already started coming ready and moving on to standard PainChek agreements. The other thing we do measure, and one thing that's really, really unique with us, is that we document every single pain assessment that's conducted. As you can see there, by the end of June, we'd a cumulative number of nearly 500,000 pain assessments, which is a significant growth quarter on quarter and year on year. And I can just let you know, it's not material at this stage, but that number by the end of September is over 650,000, which goes to show you that the product is being used extensively in aged care for the management and care of pain. And as I said before, we document every single pain assessment, and we provide insights to our clients as to how they're doing with their pain management. The three key benefits we're seeing is first of all the reduction in use of psychotropic medications for people with dementia. That's a big shift, because now they can assess whether the behaviour by the resident is caused by an underlying cause such as pain. If it is, then treat it, and if it isn't, then they can look at other treatments. This is new, and we've seen this change significantly in Australia and in the UK. So it's a massive change. So this is really good for the residents and really good for the carers. Secondly, because we've got a pain assessment tool available now, such as so now you can measure temperature with a thermometer, blood pressure with a blood pressure meter, and now pain with PainChek. So you've seen from that previous chart how the pain assessment volumes increase in the facility, so it's being used extensively. And finally, also, because you can assess pain and then reassess pain, continue to reassess it with PainChek, you can actually now start to give non-therapeutic medications and using things like heat packs to reduce the pain rather than an actual drug itself. So these are all some of the benefits everyone's seeing in the use of PainChek. Most recently, we brought out the PainChek Universal solution, and what this does is basically mean that we've integrated, we can now assess pain for those who can't verbalise. We can now document the pain score for those who can self-report, and we use our analytics to provide feedback to the carers and users as to how they're managing pain and how they can improve their insights. This is called the PainChek Universal, and this is really helping us accelerate out of aged care into home care and to the hospital market segments. Our goal is to be a global company. I mean, Australia is for us effectively our testing ground and our commercial establishment grounds. As I said before, we've got sales in New Zealand, Singapore, and the UK, and we're looking to expand into Europe and into the US over the next period. The only market there we haven't got regulatory clearance is the US, and that's in progress. The other exciting news is just literally last quarter in June this year, we got regulatory clearance in 6 countries around the world for our very innovative kids or infant pain assessment app. It's unique in the sense that it just runs a 3-second video of a child's face and picks up the level of pain relative to procedural pain. The clinical work we did with that was also published in the Lancet Digital Health Journal in September, and the Lancet Digital Health is the #1 digital journal in the world. So this is a massive breakthrough, and as you can see from there, it's a really large market. If we could just get 1%, just 1% global market share of the 140 million infants in the world at any one time, that would be over $300 million revenue for us. So again, we're unique, we're first to market, we've got patents covering our technology, and this is something very big for us. So what's the focus for the infants? It's really threefold. First of all, we are focused on post-vaccination for infants. Infants, as you probably know, have 5 immunisations conducted in the first year of their lives. That's been there for a long time, measles, mumps and rubella. And of course, we just got announced, with the COVID-19 situation, that they're running clinical trials to assess the utility for the COVID-19 vaccination for infants down to 6 months. And pain will be an important thing to assess in terms of their reaction. So we're going to be unique in that sector. Secondly, we're looking at post-operative procedures, tonsillectomies, for example, and also cochlear implants, where I spent a number of years of my career with cochlear, and kids at that age are implanted as young as 3 months of age. And again, assessing pain post-operatively is important. And finally, we're going to be targeting global therapeutic players who provide pain medication. And we've got some exciting news happening in that already, which we'll announce later this year. So PainChek, it's the adult app for multiple market sectors, and it's the infants app also for multiple global market sectors. This is an overview of the team, a very experienced team, covering operations, sales, scientists, and also overseas. And this is an overview of our board, experienced board, with biotech experience and also venture capital experience and capital markets experience. So coming towards the end, our market cap is around $62 million. We have close to $10 million of cash and no debt. We have a low burn rate, and therefore as we transition across to that ARR, we'll be covering our Australian costs quite rapidly. This is the final slide. It focuses on what we're doing this year and also talks a bit about the home care and the hospital markets, which will be more in our September summary as well. So I'll hold it there and take any questions.
Thanks for that, Phil. Really insightful information included in that presentation. We have got a few questions coming in. So let's start with one from Susan, who says, well, your case studies show early and remarkable impacts. Besides serving the aged care sector, what opportunities does your company see for its PainChek infant app?
For the infant app, we see that as being a strong consumer product. So we see the use of the infant app in hospitals, in GP environments where they need to assess pain for infants when they visit. But the biggest sector for us will be we believe the home care. So mums and dads at home, babies are waking up during the night, they're crying. Are they crying because they're in pain or they're crying because they're hunger? Currently they've got thermometers, which is great, and they can test the temperature, but with PainChek they can also test for pain. And if you think about things like Nurofen and Panadol, they treat pain and fever, but you can only use it really now for fever because you can't assess pain. So this is where the link with therapeutic companies, I think, will come in very strongly. So mums and dads at home, or parents at home, should I say, will be able to assess both temperature and pain for the children in the middle of the night and make informed decisions as to whether to take them to the surgery or to actually, manage it at home. So this is part of, home care is a big part of our future business. And that's also for the adult app as well. We're also starting the adult app in home care environments. That's for home care packages in Australia, and also for people living at home with dementia.
No, it's an incredible innovation. I mean, obviously one of the big things with medicine is the ability to communicate and find out exactly what the problem is, to diagnose and then fix it. And unfortunately, we can't talk to infants. So this is the next best thing. You also mentioned there to do with aged care in terms of being in the home as well. So I think this question is quite a good one from Alex, who says, hi, Phil, my mother is now in her 90s and is beginning to lose a lot of her independence. She's also very anti-tech. She doesn't even use a microwave. Are there any tips you can provide for me to convince her of the benefits of something like PainChek and tech health in general?
Well, this is really good because actually it's always a carer for us that will do the assessment, right? A carer does the assessment. So this would be a tool, PainChek is a tool for that person to use with his mother or grandmother, or so family members can actually we'd always recommend they run the assessment. We always do training for people, so we do that for a healthcare professional first, but the whole use of PainChek is for a person, a carer, a trained carer preferably, or a nurse, is to run the assessment on the person and to record the data and then to reassess. So we do not recommend self-assessment. That's not something that's possible. It's like you would. And I think actually, studies we've seen is that people they appreciate the fact that this product is in use. We've got a lot of quotes from family members already, where their loved ones are in aged care, and they're just delighted that there's now a tool to assess their family members for pain and to treat the pain and to minimise the incorrect medication risk that has happened over the past. And was actually part of the federal government's Royal Commission on Aged Care. One of the biggest issues there was, misdiagnosis and mistreatment.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why they were so supportive of us rolling this out rapidly, is to make a significant change in that area. So I hope that covers the question.
I think it must have. Now we have another question here from an anonymous attendee who says, how do you think the company is positioned to enter the overseas aged care markets and the larger global home care and hospital markets?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, we've already entered the home aged care market in the UK. We have a 3,000 beds covered in about 15 to 20 aged care facilities. That's already happened, and 1,500 of those have been implemented. And we've got a large pipeline with a small team in the UK, but a very good team who are running that program. We've got sales in New Zealand. We've got 3 aged care facilities in New Zealand. And ironically, because we're digital, we've actually done all the selling to New Zealand and all the training from Sydney. We are a fully digital technology. The app is downloaded through the Google and Apple Play Store. We train. We have all the training materials to do training online. We sell, through this medium, and then we provide all the results and the portal and feedback again digitally. So we're a totally digital solution. So we can actually run our whole business from Australia globally. But we are putting people on the ground in the UK, eventually in Europe, and also key people in the US to build those relationships, to have those relationships. But from a supply standpoint, we can do it all from my home if you wanted to.
Very exciting times moving forward for PainChek, that's for sure. We do have a question about the plans for the next 12 months. We'll come back to that to wrap up on. I'll just give you one before that though, from Joe, who says, people living with dementia find it challenging to understand and communicate the pain they are experiencing. How does PainChek enrich the social care sector with data to enhance the quality of services that are offered?
Well, I think, look, it's a really good question. The way we operate is that we don't just provide the pain assessment tool, but let's say we've done this in aged care, we also provide through our portal insights as to how people are managing pain, and also how they're using what treatments they're using to actually address the pain. So that's part of our overall service delivery for aged care, and we'll do this. We are planning to do exactly the same thing for the social or domiciliary market, the home care market, through a similar mechanism. And we've got some really exciting things we're working on in home care, but we see that as being the next big area, because if you keep people at home as long as possible, people do want to stay at home as long as possible, and that's everyone's goal. So having good medication, so good diagnostic and good tools in the home environment to allow family members to keep better control in that situation, it means there's less likelihood of falls, less likelihood of better methods of controlling the onset of the dementia, and therefore delaying the need to go into an aged care facility. And like most people, we see the future being keeping people at home as long as possible, and letting them to live their full lives in their homes. So that's the strategy we have.
No, absolutely, Phil. I mean, both of my grandmothers are I think 92 and 94. So we can't shift them out of the home as much as we try. They certainly don't want to go. Neither of them have a car. They don't really have much independence themselves, but there's no inclination from them whatsoever to get out. They want to be in their little castle. Final one to finish here as well for PainChek from Sandra. What are the plans for the next 12 months?
Pretty much, as that last slide, next 12 months is, look, we are consolidating our position in Australia. We've got to 60% market share in residential care. We've done a great job, and we now need to make sure we are implementing and training and retaining those large number of facilities. There's no piece of clinical software more broadly used in Australia, medical software, than PainChek in aged care. So we've actually done a fantastic job of achieving that. We've now our focus in the future now is extending to home care, extend it into hospitals. We've got agreements with Ramsay, a hospital research group, in terms of bringing it into hospitals for frail patients, bringing it to home care setting through home care packages. And then we've also done some really interesting work with disability. So we've got some really interesting studies with disabilities, because that's another area where there's a real struggle to assess pain, and we should be announcing that pretty soon, the outcome of that. That's really important. So that's all happened in Australia. Overseas, it's about getting into the UK markets, expanding to the UK market, expanding New Zealand, Canada, Singapore this year, and then broadening into Europe later next year, and then finally by 2022, 2023 into the US. So we plan to be a global business. I did global marketing for Cochlear for a number of years. I was in global marketing for Roche, in their diabetes business, based out of Germany in their headquarters. So we've done the global, our goal is to be global. But I think that what we've done in Australia has been fantastic in establishing the product and the business model, and now we're picking it up and taking it around the world.
Well, look, if there is one man who can certainly do that, it is you indeed, Phil. So thank you so much for your presentation today and answering those questions. Just as we begin to wrap up the webinar, I'll get a brief comment from each of our experts. And Phil, given you're here with us right now, the floor is yours. What would you like to take away or have people take away from today and into the future with PainChek?
I think the biggest thing is, when COVID-19 hit 2 years ago or so, our old model was we'd visit every aged care facility, we'd go in to sell, we'd go in to train, we'd go into, and it was a lengthy process and costly process, but that's the way it worked. The last 18 months, things have changed. This format now is going to be having a digital product that can be digitally delivered and trained. It's going to be advantageous not just for the business but also for the client, because then you only come in when you need to come in, especially in an aged care facility or at a hospital, and you can provide all your services remotely, from a source like this. So we've made that transition, and that transition was forced upon us because of COVID. It would have taken us 10 years. We've done it in 1.5 to 2. And I think that model will stay, be more of a hybrid, but will stay for the future wherever possible. And I think that's a big message, and a big reason why this sort of technology is important.
Wonderful. Phil Daffas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, thank you.
Now, Dr. Macdonald, if we could get you back, Ross, that'd be fantastic as well. We've got Thian already popping through, so, here we go. Okay, well, look, in the interest of having asked you first, sorry, Thian, I know you popped on the screen first, but I will go with Ross to start with. Ross, if we can just unmute your microphone there as well, mate, that'd be fantastic. All right, Ross, the floor is yours. What do you want our viewers from today to take away from your presentation and moving forward with Cynata?
Thanks, James. Look, I think in biotech land, investors should be very mindful of the high failure rate, which is just inherent in the development of cutting-edge drug products. So what you need to be looking at as an investor is a couple of things. First of all, good clinical data. There's a tick in the box for Cynata. We've shown that our product works in people with the disease, and the path therefore to commercialization becomes a whole lot easier when that data is in the bag. The second thing, of course, is a good cash balance, and I believe Cynata is well cashed up. We took on some capital earlier this year, including an investment by one of the leading healthcare institutional investors in Australia, Bioscience Managers. And so, and then the third thing is a robust clinical portfolio, multiple shots on goal, basically. And again, keeping in mind the attrition rate, if a company has got multiple therapeutic targets in different areas, then that also provides shareholders with a basket investment of where, they've got more than one, hand in the game.
Wonderful. Ross, thank you so much for your time today and for giving that beautiful little summation there. All the best moving forward for Cynata.
Thanks, James, and thanks everybody for your attention today.
Well, let's now finally throw it over to Thian, who's been waiting there patiently from Invion. Mr. Chew, what would you like our wonderful members who have attended here today to take away from the presentation, and what can they look forward to moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think the tagline is "Watch this space." We've been pretty quiet. Invion's been pretty quiet for the last couple of years. We've been in discovery, trying to find the compound we want to take to the clinic, and we've done that. We've also done a lot of work, which is not very exciting for shareholders, but pretty important for us to take the program forward. And so we're at the stage now where I think there'll be some interesting pieces of news and updates that hopefully will be good for the market. So one of them is obviously the continuation of these proof of concept tests across a number of cancers. The second one is really talking about what are our next steps and plans regarding clinical trials. And the third one is now that we've just closed this round on the new disease areas of atherosclerosis and infectious diseases, what are we doing there? So those are the three things to look out for.
Wonderful. Thian, thank you so much for your time today. All the best for the future with Invion as well. And to Ross and Philip as well, I just want to thank all of our experts for today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody.
Well, there we have it. So we've certainly learned a lot from our medical and health space, haven't we? It's been a very interesting InvestNest webinar session this time around. We've had fantastic presentations from all of our guests, who I've got to commend as well for their excellent usage of Zoom too. It's not always quite this smooth, but we've certainly enjoyed the ability that you've shown today, not just in your field, but in using this product as well. So on behalf of Kalkine Media, I would like to extend my gratitude towards all of you, and also for our esteemed members in the viewership too. Great insights that we've all taken on board today. And on that note, if you do have any further questions that didn't get answered today, you know what to do. Head across to the email, use info@kalkinemedia.com. You can address your questions to our experts, respectively of Ross, Thian, and also Philip. Just give a little title in there of which expert you're trying to contact, and then write your question in there. But that is a wrap for this webinar. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like any further information, best way to do that is to head across to our website, www.kalkinemedia.com.au. And of course, don't forget, we do have a live TV product that is now running between 9 and 5 every single day. That's Kalkine TV. Make sure to stay tuned with Kalkine Media for the next upcoming InvestNest webinar series. And I hope that you've enjoyed today's session. Have a fantastic afternoon.